She had spent 15 years tirelessly mopping their floors, and then one day she calmly walked into the boardroom and fired the CEO right in front of the entire board. They only ever called her Miss Denise. No one recalled her full name. No one referred to her by the name she wished. For them, she would always be Miss Denise, the janitor, the woman who passed through hallway after hallway without anyone ever really seeing her. Year after year, day in and day out, Denise Carter started her shift at 5:45 a.m., back when the whole city was still half asleep, and the big shots of the South's leading logistics conglomerate were snug in their opulent apartments. Her pale gray uniform had faded unevenly over the years, the frayed cuffs and pant hems beyond repair. Her inexpensive sneakers lost their shape long ago, the soles worn threadbare from countless steps up from the basement to the rooftop, through hallways covered in plush carpet. Denise never complained. She never asked for more than what her job demanded. Her tightly bound, wiry curls rested neatly at the nape of her neck, and her face remained stoic and silent, like she'd become part of every corner of the building, a fixture that no one gave a second thought to. They referred to her with that vague title, Miss Denise. No one ever said Denise Carter. No one cared about her last name or her age. Few even bothered to ask what she used to do or what experiences shaped her life. To the people here, from the sales associates and maintenance crew to middle managers and silver-suited executives, Miss Denise was simply the cleaning lady. They chatted around her, joked, and debated seven-figure deals or boasted about their personal achievements, while she quietly crouched to pick up stray scraps of paper or wiped away someone's spilled coffee from the carpet. No one remembered Denise on Christmas morning, nor did anyone wish her a happy birthday. Few ever considered that she had any life beyond her mop, her gloves, and the pungent bottle of industrial cleaner. In their eyes, she was a ghost drifting through the tower's floors, glimpsed briefly in a third-floor hallway, then silently stationed in a restroom in the office wing, or stooped and slender, patiently cleaning the glass walls even when the rain pounded the windows. Denise grew used to being glanced over, accustomed to hushed remarks of annoyance or curt reminders like, "Make sure this boardroom is spotless before 3 o'clock," or, "Don't leave streaks on the floor. Guests are on their way." She took it all in, absorbing the cacophony of a place that once represented someone's dream. But for her, it was just a job. Occasionally, new interns or temporary staff would greet her with a cheery, "Good morning, Miss Denise." But within a few months, they too learned to treat her as invisible, an indispensable part of the building's cold, unfeeling culture. Behind the walls of tinted glass and the glow of yellow overhead lights, Denise Carter never truly belonged here. Yet she knew everything that happened day and night. She silently witnessed joy, tears, disappointment, disdain, and the hidden agendas behind closed boardroom doors. For 15 years, this petite black woman bore witness to every shift within Creswell Holdings, like an unnamed, ageless, powerless shadow, never taking her eyes off a single thing. Who could have predicted that this unseen ghost was, in fact, the true spirit of the entire empire? Even as Denise Carter quietly swept every corner of the lobby, the world around her spun with its frantic pace and cold ambitions. Denise blended into that bigger picture like a familiar shadow. No one glanced back, and no one truly saw her. Yet deep within Creswell Holdings' plush-carpeted hallways and luxurious boardrooms, the air grew ever more frigid and toxic, under a silent culture that treated contempt as a given. To most employees and executives, Miss Denise was simply part of the background, like the plastic flower arrangement at the front desk or the faded rug by the entrance. She was everywhere, yet she never truly existed in their minds. They freely discussed business deals, internal power struggles, crude jokes, or personal dramas right in front of Denise, treating her as if she were a silent wall. Many openly looked down on her, sometimes deliberately, just to relish a petty feeling of power over someone they assumed would never dare speak up. Bradley Cooper, a marketing associate who always wore a sharp navy suit, was a prime example. One afternoon during his lunch break, Bradley casually set his half-eaten sandwich on the trash bin right beside Denise as she cleaned, without so much as a sideways glance. As she bent down to pick it up and throw it away, he looked up and snapped, "Make sure the carpet is completely dry. In a bit, there's an important meeting in the third-floor boardroom, and I don't want the boss to see a single stain." Denise simply nodded in silence. The next day, Bradley returned with a Starbucks coffee in hand and carelessly spilled it right onto the exact rug Denise had painstakingly cleaned the night before. Without apologizing, he frowned and said, "Miss Denise, how is it you still can't keep the coffee from spreading like this? No wonder people say janitors can't do anything right." Comments like these cut into the atmosphere, leaving invisible cracks in anyone's self-respect who happened to overhear, even bystanders. Yet Denise never reacted or offered excuses. She calmly tidied up the spill, as though she'd long grown accustomed to playing the role of silent servant. Even worse than Bradley were those at higher levels of power, who displayed their contempt with more refinement. Douglas Fairbanks, the executive vice president, epitomized someone who measured value solely by title and bank balance. Douglas had a habit of splashing on far too much expensive cologne and always strutted down the hallway with the air of someone surveying mere dust below him. One late afternoon, Denise was bent over cleaning the glass doors of the VIP boardroom when Douglas swept in with his assistant Amanda Hill. He laughed loudly, loud enough for Denise to hear, and said, "Amanda, can you imagine someone working here their whole life and never owning a single desk? Yet, they still call it a job at Creswell." Laughter erupted, mingling with the heavy scent of his cologne. Amanda joined in, turning to Denise with a look of pity mixed with mockery. "Guess she's more used to standing than sitting, don't you think?" Office workers nearby snickered. No one spoke up or protested. Everyone understood the unspoken rule. To defy was to exile yourself from the center of power. Denise stood motionless, her gaze cold, her lips pressed together as usual. No words of retaliation, no defiant glance. She continued her work, slow and deliberate, as if nothing had happened. That icy culture seeped into every small gesture, the way people avoided eye contact with Denise in the hallway, to the way no one bothered to step aside when she pushed her cleaning cart through the lobby, or even their conversations about bonuses or benefit cuts right in front of her, completely indifferent to the fact that she, too, was just another worker in the same system. In everyone's eyes, Denise Carter would always be Miss Denise, the nameless, silent floor sweeper, and, in their minds, entirely worthless. They had no idea that behind each stroke of her mop lay a sharp gaze and a meticulous memory, silently storing every face, every word, every action, and all the dark undercurrents they were helping to nourish day by day. But what everyone sees, or rather what they choose not to see, about Denise Carter is just the tiny tip of an iceberg hidden beneath her faded uniform. Behind that unassuming figure lies an unexpected past. Denise was the one who laid the very first bricks of the famed Creswell Holdings empire. Years ago, in a tiny kitchen on the outskirts of Columbus, Georgia, Denise and her husband, Roland Carter, sat side by side at their old kitchen table, passionately sketching out big dreams on the back of a grocery receipt. Roland was a man of action, fiery, fearless of failure, having worked as a driver's helper under his uncle on long hauls across Alabama and South Carolina. He knew every mile of those highways and every trick of the transportation trade as if they were etched into the palm of his hand. Denise, on the other hand, was the quiet one, a lover of mathematics and the eloquence of numbers. After Roland returned from a late shift on the road, she would stay up poring over stacks of receipts, meticulously calculating expenses, mapping out plans, and sniffing out every potential risk hidden in the fine print of their modest contracts. It was her prudence and savvy that led them to establish a separate legal entity for their fledgling business from day one, shielding themselves from unforeseen liabilities, even those that might arise from friends they trusted. Those were the best of times, when their faith in each other was all they had. One night, under the dim glow of a lone kitchen bulb, Denise placed a small check in front of her husband, the entire inheritance left to her by her father, a sum that for many would have meant the opportunity to buy a comfortable home. But Denise chose to stake it on Roland's dream instead. "Sign your name to the account," she said softly, her fingers gently curling around a cold teacup. "I'll stay behind the scenes and handle the books, the contracts. No one needs to know I'm an investor. I trust you. As long as we're in this together." Roland squeezed her hand, his eyes shining with hope and worry. Both. "Are you sure? If something goes wrong—" "I know what I'm doing, Roland," Denise replied with a serene smile. "And I trust you won't let me lose." They began that way, with nothing more than a rented room, 2 outdated phones, and a rickety fax machine. Roland's childhood friend, Curtis Banning, brought in connections and some seed money. Everything seemed to go smoothly. Within just a few years, that tiny trucking business exploded into the new star of the southern logistics scene, thanks to Roland's adventurous spirit and Denise's meticulous planning. But the glow of success drew shadows they never anticipated. Their lavish contract celebrations grew more extravagant by the day, and partner meetings became boisterous affairs. Meanwhile, Denise kept to her small office, quietly handling the paperwork and signing documents under the name of a separate legal entity she created to protect her family. Though her husband trusted her, Denise always knew that, in a world dominated by men like Roland and Curtis, her presence was as inconsequential as a shadow, there if needed, but easily dismissed. Then tragedy struck. One stormy night in 2004, Roland was killed in a horrific car accident while supervising a time-sensitive shipment in the dead of night. Denise froze at her desk when she heard the news, her world shattering in an instant. His funeral was colder than she'd imagined, delivered with a brief eulogy by Curtis Banning, the co-founder who barely even mentioned her name. They spoke of their achievements, the million-dollar freight runs, but no one asked, what will happen to Denise? In the days that followed, Denise struggled to manage every logistical detail while enduring a tidal wave of undercurrents within the company. Curtis quietly met with shareholders, redrafting documents to remove Roland's name from every contract, and, more insidiously, cut Denise off entirely from access to the company's internal information. In his mind, Denise had no value now that Roland was gone. He assumed that a small black woman without title or voice would simply vanish like so many other shadows who had slipped away before. But Curtis didn't know. Denise would never let go. She held in her hands every legal document, those original contracts bearing both their signatures, the notarized partnership agreements, and even copies of off-the-record deals that only she knew existed. She kept silent, made no fuss, and didn't hire an attorney to sue, because Denise understood that some battles must be fought at precisely the right moment. Such patience is something only those who have lost everything can truly comprehend. Behind her slumped form in that gray uniform every morning lied a piece of company history stolen from Creswell Holdings. A past that no one there, save Denise, remembered or dared recall. But Denise never forgot. She had not forgotten, and she would never forgive. Memories of Roland still remained vivid in Denise's mind, even though everything felt buried in the past. Not so long ago, their tiny kitchen had been filled with laughter. Now it existed only as a cold, grayish memory, much like the faded uniform she wore. Tragedy struck on a rainy night when Roland received a call about a shipment gone awry on the highway. He never came home. One moment there was hope, the next a collision and an exhausted driver, and everything ended in an instant. Denise was stunned by the news, her hands shaking as she clutched her husband's keepsakes as though they were the only fragments of life left to her. Roland's funeral was swift, somber, and colder than Denise could have imagined. She quietly hung back toward the rear of the chapel, a black hat shielding half her face so that none of Roland's business associates or the new shareholders would recognize her. They whispered among themselves about contracts, the company's future, and revenue figures. Curtis Banning, Roland's longtime friend who had once shared ragged meals and worn-out sleeping spots with him, stepped up to the podium with a calm expression. His eulogy only touched on the company's successes and its historic shipments. He offered no condolences, no acknowledgement of Denise's loss. The atmosphere was icy. Denise stood silent and still, listening to the shuffle of shoes and murmurs about deals, feeling Curtis's empty gaze sweep over her as though they were strangers. It seemed that the moment Roland passed away, Denise was erased from the very boundaries of this place she had helped build. A few weeks later, before Denise's grief could even begin to subside, she realized she had been erased from the world of Creswell Holdings. Curtis, using the ruthless cunning that only a seasoned dealmaker could muster, had quietly removed Roland's name from every ownership document, reclaimed her office keys, changed the safe combination code, and blocked all of Denise's access to the company's financial and administrative channels. He didn't send a single message or make a phone call. He never even appeared in front of Denise. Everything transpired in total silence, as though she had never existed in their lives. The days that followed were defined by anguish and emptiness. Sometimes she would stand by the window of her small apartment for hours, gripping the legal files she had kept safely tucked away. She read through every partnership agreement, every contract, every transfer document. Those things Curtis assumed were forgotten or discarded. In reality, Curtis knew Denise was intelligent. He merely banked on her silence, the distance of his power, and the outdated prejudices ingrained in the business world, that a black woman without a title or status would never dare to fight back. Denise's disappearance played out exactly as Curtis had scripted. In Creswell Holdings' internal records, Roland Carter was reduced to a mere footnote, part of the company's founding history. Denise, no one spoke of her. All that remained were the new faces on the board of directors, the smug laughter echoing through the long hallways, and the late-night meetings focused on restructuring equity and redistributing shares to new investors. Perhaps, to Curtis and people like him, Denise had truly been wiped off Creswell Holdings' map of power. He didn't know, nor did he care, that across town, in a modest apartment, a black woman continued to live in quiet dignity, nursing not only the pain of losing her husband, but also a simmering flame of defiance, a wounded pride, and an unwavering belief that justice would one day return. And no one could have guessed that, out of the deep crack of that betrayal, a silent plan, patient and relentless, had begun to take shape amid ashes that seemed cold and lifeless. Denise vanished from their sight, but in truth she was merely withdrawing, waiting, and preparing for the day she would turn the board's table on its head. Curtis Banning and his new associates believed that Denise Carter had been utterly swallowed by grief and obscurity. But inside that petite woman, a cold will was taking root, nourished by the humiliations and losses she had forced herself to endure. Denise hadn't vanished. Month after month, she lived quietly in her small apartment, painstakingly organizing and stashing away every single paper and legal contract she had prepared and backed up from the company's earliest days. Each night, she reread every line, silently reminding herself that justice belongs not to the hasty, but to those who know how to wait for the right moment. In 2007, a job posting for a night shift cleaning position at Creswell Logistics appeared on a community bulletin board in a suburban county. Denise stared at the words, "Work at corporate headquarters, honest, hard, working candidates preferred, no experience necessary." It was the first time in years her heart pounded, not from sorrow, but from hope. She resolved to return to the place she had once helped build, not as an owner or co-founder, but as an anonymous janitor. She prepared her application meticulously, adopted a new surname, borrowed an old friend's address, and filled out her resume with simple labor jobs from a distant rural area. Denise packed everything she needed into a small bag: a notebook, a few forged IDs, and, of course, certified copies of all the legal documents proving her ownership stake in Creswell Holdings. With determined eyes, she walked up to the interview desk, facing a young HR employee who knew nothing about the company's history and would never recognize the gaunt woman in worn clothes. No one questioned her true identity. After all, no one expected a janitor to have once been an owner. The interview was quick. Denise answered basic questions in a calm voice, her expression composed like someone who had weathered hardships far beyond what the young interviewer could imagine. 2 days later, she received the call. "Ms. Johnson, welcome to Creswell Logistics night shift cleaning team." Denise smiled, her heart stirring with emotions she couldn't name, bitter, elated, and tinged with a secret sense of triumph. On her first day back, Denise stepped into Creswell Holdings' grand lobby wearing cheap shoes and a crisp new uniform. There was no trace left of the woman who once sat behind a desk drafting contracts and strategizing with Roland. Everything had changed. The company logo on the wall gleamed brightly. The reception area was more spacious, the marble floors more opulent. But the atmosphere was colder, heavier than before, as if the fluorescent lights were casting a harsh glare on the rigid class divisions. In the third floor hallway, Denise happened to cross paths with Curtis Banning, now bulkier, with salt and pepper hair, flanked by several younger colleagues. Curtis barely glanced at her, his gaze the dismissive flick of someone who believed that people like that existed only to serve as scenery for his world of power. Denise stifled a bitter smile. He had completely forgotten, or pretended to forget, the woman who had once drawn the map to success alongside him and Roland. It was even more painful when Denise realized that Creswell Holdings was no longer under Curtis's direct control. The highest authority now rested with Thomas Wexler, a young CEO imported from Florida State with a dazzling academic record and a media-friendly persona. Wexler strode through the halls with the swagger of a man who knew he called every shot. He cared only about optics, fixated on numbers, rewards, and his own image. He had no inkling of sweat, tears, or the people who had literally bled to lay the company's foundation. And so, Denise quietly became the new ghost of Creswell Holdings, a night shift custodian whom nobody bothered to notice, let alone see as a potential threat. From the shadows, she observed everything: the marketing team debating their next campaign, managers scheming to cut employee benefits, late-night parties reserved for the upper echelon, and the laborers who were abused most harshly during weekend shifts. With each passing night, Denise gathered more fragments of a Creswell Holdings rotting from within, morally as much as physically. Yet she remained silent, bent over as she pushed her mop through the endless corridors, her eyes glowing quietly under the pale yellow lights. Revenge need not be hurried, only patient, cunning, and fueled by a pain so profound that forgiveness would never find a place in her heart. Denise Carter's footsteps in the Creswell Holdings corridors grew increasingly light and precise, as though each step were calculated not to stir any suspicions among the powerful people here. Ever since she reappeared as a janitor, Denise never wasted a single night. To everyone else, she was simply Miss Denise, gentle and quiet. But in truth, every hour and every minute she spent here amounted to a relentless investigation that had quietly continued for 15 years. In the dimly lit, nearly empty hallways and between offices where only the glow of night lights remained, Denise listened carefully and recorded everything. Whenever she passed by an early meeting or a late-night heated discussion, she never missed a word. Whether it was veiled innuendo or executive plans they thought no one else could hear. Each night, after her shift ended, Denise would sit down by her small metal cabinet in the basement, open her worn black notebook, and meticulously write the date and time, names involved, content of the conversation, and any evidence. Those pages filled quickly with discussions about cutting bonuses for lower-level employees, forging invoices to collect kickbacks, or decisions to accelerate the layoff of older staff to save on insurance costs. Denise paid special attention to every detail others would overlook. A loose brick outside the 8th floor boardroom, where she often overheard directors debating secret bonuses for themselves. The microwave in the break room that kept short-circuiting because nobody bothered to fix it, proof of the logistics department's indifference to workers' conditions, or phantom equipment purchase invoices haphazardly signed by finance department heads. She also noticed how management layers abused their power to manipulate the benefit system, legitimizing unfair bonuses and squeezing frontline workers. She witnessed multiple night shifts where female janitors were forced to work double shifts, purportedly because there was no budget, while the board merrily held parties and entertained VIP guests. One night, Denise overheard Meredith Chandler, the head of finance, telling her assistant, "Let those below keep working extra. We won't pay overtime. If they complain, just say it's the new policy. I'll cover that expense for you. Don't worry." During moments like these, Denise didn't just record the words. She secretly gathered evidence. A quick snapshot of a payroll sheet, a photograph of an irregular invoice, a hidden audio file capturing conversations among department heads. She stored all of it carefully, absolutely confidential on separate devices, mostly USB drives, and in a dark folder on the internal network she accessed in the wee hours when everyone else had left. She also paid close attention to changes in attitude among those who had risen thanks to Creswell Holdings. Thomas Wexler, the young CEO, increasingly arrogant and flashy, who routinely awarded himself bonuses funded by cuts to employees' salaries and benefits. Curtis Banning, now retired into an advisory role but still secretly manipulating. Backroom deals, awarding contracts to favored firms, and profiting in the shadows. For 15 years, Denise not only collected the truth, but also internalized the true nature of the very machine she had helped build. Its apathy, coldness, insensitivity, and the corruption and rot that had seeped into every beam, every carpet fiber, and every person sitting behind those frosted glass doors. Beneath her polite smile and slender frame, Denise became the invisible overseer, the keeper of every secret, every piece of evidence exposing the moral decay of those perched at the top of Creswell Holdings' pyramid of power. No one suspected a woman pushing a mop cart in the dark, but each page of Denise's black notebook held fragments that would lay bare the true face of a once renowned corporation, and served as the weapon she silently sharpened for the day justice would be served. From Denise Carter's black journal pages brimming with indignation, Creswell Holdings' rot became ever clearer day by day. Her notebook grew thicker with records of brazen bonus cuts, schemes siphoning overtime pay, and vanished benefits, all born from the ruthless decisions of the new leadership. But what haunted Denise most was their callous disregard for the fate of the rank and file workers. It was no rare sight for Denise to witness longtime employees, those who had been with the company since its earliest days, suddenly fired just for daring to speak up. Take Terrence Doyle, for example, an honest, upright warehouse manager. In a staff meeting, Terrence raised the issue of pay disparities between office staff and frontline laborers. The very next week, he was summoned to HR, asked to sign a termination notice for organizational reasons, with no warning and no severance. Less than an hour later, an internal email announced, "All communications with Terrence will be handled by legal." Denise noted the date, time, who sent it, and the entire story. She watched silently as Terrence walked out of the building, his eyes glazed, and saw how his colleagues, terrified, didn't dare offer a word of comfort or even look at him for more than a fleeting moment. Such injustices repeated over and over, layer upon layer, ceaselessly. Each instance stoked Denise's fury, yet she maintained her composure, continuing her role as the invisible Miss Denise, listening, observing, and gathering proof. But all boundaries must eventually crack. One Tuesday afternoon, as Denise was mopping the hallway outside the grand boardroom, where senior executives were about to receive VIP guests, the floor was spotless from her meticulous work, free of dust and footprints. Suddenly, Thomas Wexler appeared at the far end of the hallway, looking sharp in a light-colored suit, holding a paper plate with a half-eaten slice of birthday cake. Wexler glared at Denise with a malicious look, then abruptly dropped the cake onto the freshly cleaned floor, the white frosting smearing across the carpet in a hideous mess. Denise remained silent, bent to retrieve the plate, saying nothing. But Wexler didn't stop there. He planted his hands on his hips and snidely nodded toward the mess. "You missed this spot, it seems. I'm about to bring guests in. Think you can clean it up properly? Or would you rather let us handle it ourselves for speed's sake?" Still, she said nothing, simply reached for her mop and went back to work. Wexler pursed his lips, then deliberately lowered his voice into a semi-whisper, half-threatening. "You know, sometimes I think you people only pretend to work just to clock in and steal time. If I paid you extra, would you actually do a better job? Or is this half-hearted effort just your standard routine?" His words, laden with contempt and tinged with racism, froze the air around them. Denise's eyes flickered with icy resolve, but she kept her calm and replied softly, "I will clean it again, Mr. Wexler. This floor will be spotless." Wexler let out a patronizing chuckle and clapped his hands as if he'd just taught a lesson to a subordinate. Passing employees snickered in amusement. Some averted their eyes, unwilling to look at Denise. The sweet smell of cake mixed with fresh paint, and Wexler's arrogance and habitual disdain drifted through every corner, reminding Denise that here a person's worth was measured solely by title and status. After that incident, Wexler grew even more arrogant. He often invoked cost-cutting to slash bonuses, forced warehouse staff to work unpaid overtime, and even made administrative employees put in extra hours with no notice. Anyone who dared object was immediately disciplined, and the rest grew accustomed to turning a blind eye to these injustices. Denise knew it was time to prepare for a real reckoning. She no longer wanted to simply record these events. Each time she saw the sad, resigned faces of her fellow workers or heard sighs behind the room door, she reminded herself that her prolonged silence, if unbroken, would become a crime in itself. In the quiet of the night shift, long after everyone had gone home, Denise sat by her black notebook, slowly writing the last entry for that day. Her eyes shone with a cold, unwavering resolve. This time, no one would ever look down on Miss Denise again. That night, Denise Carter tossed and turned in her small room, the scratches on her hands throbbing more painfully than usual. Although she thought she'd grown used to injustice, rage and bitterness welled up in her chest. She sat silently, staring at the dense lines in her black journal, recalling Terence Doyle's haunted eyes, Wexler's arrogant glare, and Curtis Banning's cold smile from years past. But when morning came, everything changed forever. As soon as Denise stepped into the locker room, she saw Cynthia Moore, a young janitor, collapsed on the floor next to her locker, tears streaming down her uniform. Cynthia's face was swollen. Her trembling hands clutched her phone. Denise moved closer and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "What's wrong, Cynthia?" she asked softly. Cynthia choked out her story, her sobs cutting through her words. "My son, he was in an accident. He's in the hospital. I just need to take one day off, please. But HR said they can't cover my shift. If I don't find someone to fill in, they'll cut my pay." Denise squeezed her fist, listening silently as Cynthia's tears fell. On the shift roster, Cynthia's name was still marked for her scheduled hours, with a note: "No shift swaps unless approved by management for emergencies." But to Cynthia, her child's life mattered far more than HR's indifference, an indifference that saw only shifts, not the human beings behind each name. The scene cut into Denise like a knife. She realized that her 15 years of endurance had only prolonged this injustice. In Cynthia's tear-filled eyes, Denise saw her own younger self, the girl who once believed that silence and hard work would lead to something better. But here, silence only led to being forgotten. That night, after the corridors had dimmed and the lights were low, Denise didn't go straight home as she usually did. She pulled out her phone and dialed Elliot Miles, her steadfast lawyer, the only person she had trusted with the secret all these years. As soon as he answered, Denise spoke decisively. "Elliot, it's time. I'll send you all the evidence tonight." There was a brief silence on the other end before Elliot replied in his steady voice, "Are you sure, Denise? Once you do this, there's no turning back." Denise took a deep breath, recalling the faces in her black notebook, those unjustly fired, those who cried behind bathroom doors, the exhausted sighs that only she ever heard. "I'm sure. I've cleaned up this mess for too long. Now it's time to clean out the rotten people." Under the cover of night, Denise retrieved a USB drive hidden in her cabinet. She transferred every document, recording, and photograph she'd collected over 15 years to Elliot. Original contract copies, transfer letters, lists of wrongfully terminated employees, Wexler's hidden bonus ledgers, notes on benefit cutbacks, and schemes to push workers into poverty. Every scrap of evidence sent without hesitation. Elliot confirmed receipt of the files. His reply was brief. "Tomorrow, I'll contact the Board of Shareholders and prepare the emergency meeting according to the bylaws. Be ready." That evening, Denise sat quietly by her window, looking down at the faint glow of city lights, knowing she had just unleashed a storm of fire that would sweep away all that was rotten and broken. Somewhere down the hallway, Cynthia still sat crying, and exhausted workers passed each other like ghosts. But inside Denise, for the first time in a long while, a fierce belief burned. This time, justice would not look the other way. As the city lights outside Denise Carter's window dimmed and gave way to a new morning, the gears of her silent coup began to turn rapidly. Denise knew full well that waging a battle against an entire system of power, like Creswell Holdings, couldn't rely on sudden emotion. It required a meticulous, cold-blooded plan, much like the way the villains in her life had treated her. From the moment she handed all her evidence over to attorney Elliot Miles, Denise focused every thought on setting her minds at every critical step. First, Elliot and Denise reviewed every legal provision: the shareholders' bylaws, the right to call an emergency meeting, the procedure for demanding a non-confidence vote, and most crucially, the irrefutable proof of Denise's legitimate ownership, established back when Roland Carter was still alive. Every page of documentation was scrutinized. All key timestamps were officially notarized, and they left not a single loophole for the slick in-house lawyers on the board to exploit. Denise and Elliot compiled hundreds of pages of reports. A list of employees wrongfully terminated, including dates, reasons given, and signed. Confirmations. Records of the irrational bonus payouts made to senior management, in stark contrast to the cutbacks to frontline workers' benefits. Invoices, photographs, and audio files documenting internal conversations about doctoring records to conceal stolen overtime pay. A list of all the hidden orders Thomas Wexler had signed to boost his own bonuses, while slashing the employee welfare fund. Elliot assembled a silencing file. All of this material would be sent directly to the board of shareholders in case the executive team attempted to bury or delay the emergency meeting. Denise, as a co-founder holding controlling shares, had the right to convene a no-confidence vote herself without going through the CEO. Elliot carefully walked Denise through every step of the process, down to the smallest detail. Simultaneously with these legal preparations, Denise subtly but pointedly altered her appearance. On Monday morning, instead of her worn janitor's uniform, Denise arrived at the building clad in a crisp navy blazer, a white button-down shirt, and polished new dress shoes. There was no mop bucket in sight, no creaking cart to push down the hallway. Denise walked confidently past the reception desk, her gaze no longer averted but calm and penetrating. The receptionist, Tasha, paused mid-step, surprised to see Miss Denise looking unfamiliar. Taller, more authoritative than even some of the directors who had strolled through those doors. None of the leadership, from Wexler to any department heads, suspected a thing. To them, Denise was simply that quiet, older cleaning lady, not a potential threat. Meanwhile, Wexler continued to hold boastful meetings about his achievements and sign cost optimization decrees, and Curtis Banning sat self-satisfied in his advisory role, convinced that his master stroke from years ago was foolproof. Behind closed doors, Denise and Elliot finalized printed copies of their reports, organizing the evidence into several separate dossiers. One for the shareholders' board, one for relevant regulatory bodies, and a backup copy for the press or government agencies if public disclosure became necessary. Elliot also reached out discreetly to certain large shareholders who were already dissatisfied with Wexler's actual performance, quietly building support for Denise ahead of the upcoming meeting. On the final night before her decisive move, Denise stood alone in a small office she'd rented near the company's headquarters. The desk lamp illuminated the thick stacks of documents in front of her. Her once frail hands, thinned by years of cleaning, gripped those files tightly, her eyes reflecting a cold resolve interwoven with deep conviction. She knew that even a single misstep could send 15 years of careful work down the drain. But Denise had been preparing for this moment her entire life. They think I'm just a shadow, but tomorrow they'll be exposed under the very light of justice they so desperately tried to keep hidden, she whispered, her voice echoing in the silent room like an irrevocable vow. The next morning, when Denise stepped into the elevator bound for the 8th floor, where the special shareholders' meeting would be held, no one among those who had once looked down on her realized they were walking straight into her trap. And behind them, the doors to their final reckoning began to close. That morning, the 8th floor of Creswell Holdings was flooded with cold, harsh light. The main boardroom had been meticulously prepared just like any quarterly review, with a long walnut table, luxurious leather chairs, and a glass wall offering a sweeping view of the city. 12 board members filed in and took their seats one by one, their faces brimming with confidence, arrogance, or the usual indifference. At the head of the table, Thomas Wexler adjusted his tie and tapped his fingertips on the tabletop, asserting his absolute authority. Curtis Banning sat near the end, his gaze unfocused, still convinced that today would be just another routine meeting. Precisely at 10 a.m., the door swung open. Everyone was stunned to see Denise Carter, not the quiet Miss Denise with a mop, but a woman in a dark blazer, her expression ice-cold, flanked by attorney Elliot Miles, who carried a sleek black briefcase. Denise laid a thick dossier on the table, neither rushing nor bowing her head, only an eerily calm determination. Wexler knit his brow in annoyance. "Excuse me, but this is a board meeting. The cleaning crew is scheduled after business hours. You? What are you doing here?" Denise said nothing. Elliot spoke up, his tone sharp in the stunned silence. "Good morning, all. I am Elliot Miles, legal counsel for Ms. Denise Carter, co-founder and current majority shareholder of Creswell Holdings. Today's meeting has been called under the company bylaws to address serious governance and operational violations." The boardroom froze. Curtis stared in disbelief, mouth ajar, unable to speak. The others exchanged skeptical glances. "Is this some kind of joke?" Wexler scoffed, trying to recover his composure, though his voice sounded uncertain. Elliot remained unshaken. He pulled out documents one by one, placing them in front of each board member. Here is the founding agreement from 1998, bearing the signatures of the late co-founder Roland Carter, Curtis Banning, and Ms. Denise Carter, accompanied by a notarized share transfer executed after Mr. Carter's passing. Ms. Carter retains full voting rights on the Carter family's shares, equivalent to 52% control. Tension thickened the air. Wexler's face flushed crimson. "That can't be right. We never received any notice about this." Denise slowly opened a second binder and set before them payroll ledgers, bonus and penalty reports, evidence of employee benefit cuts, irregular invoices, and audio recordings of internal conversations. "I am not here to argue," she said. "I am here to remind you that for the past 15 years, I have witnessed every wrongdoing, every instance of skimming, every tear and every moment of pain of the people you treated as invisible." Wexler sprang up, voice sharp. "This is abuse of power. Who gave you—" Elliot cut him off, resolute. "Miss Carter has full authority, in accordance with legal procedure, to convene this meeting. And under the shareholders' bylaws, she may call for a vote of no confidence and immediately remove any board member whose actions harm the company." A young board member, Jonas Evers, turned to Denise, eyes wide in astonishment. You're really the owner?" Denise nodded, her gaze coolly scanning each face. I am the one who built this place. I once believed in you, believing this company would change so many lives, but what I've seen is corruption, power twisted into a weapon to oppress the vulnerable." Curtis Banning shrank back in his seat, his complexion ashen. Wexler, still fighting back, said, "If you think a stack of papers will—" At that moment, 2 security officers appeared outside the boardroom door, standing rigid and expressionless. Elliot placed typed dismissal notices, signed by Denise Carter, on the table in front of each board member implicated in wrongdoing. Effective immediately, Mr. Thomas Wexler is suspended from his role as CEO. All executive authority transfers to Ms. Denise Carter, the sole legal representative of Creswell Holdings, until a new board is elected. Silence reigned in the boardroom, broken only by the rustling of paper and the panic in their eyes. No one dared to laugh or object. The stunned group felt the harsh truth more acutely than any accusation. Denise looked each of them in the eye. "This is not the end. It's the beginning of justice, and the day you pay for every injustice you thought would remain buried forever." When Wexler left the room in humiliating silence, and Curtis averted his eyes, the other board members suddenly felt small and terrified before a woman they had long dismissed as a shadow. Denise Carter had reclaimed everything, not just with evidence, but with the resilience of someone driven to the brink of injustice, ready to wipe it all away and restore justice anew. The boardroom fell into a heavy silence as Denise Carter calmly laid out each stack of documents before the stunned board members. Every original contract, each signature of Roland Carter, Curtis Banning, and Denise herself, glistened under the overhead lights. The share, transfer agreements, and notarized powers of attorney, kept securely since Roland's death, carried timestamps that could not be disputed. Curtis Banning, once the puppet master behind every company backroom deal, sat hunched in his chair, lips pressed tightly together, his eyes fixed on the tabletop. All the swagger and confidence of a seasoned old fox had evaporated. Facing Denise, he was left with nothing but the hollow defeat of a man whose past and legal obligations were now laid bare before him. The ghost of his betrayal from 15 years ago had finally been summoned into the bright glare of day. Thomas Wexler, arrogant as ever, could not hide the collapse of his ill-gotten power. He leapt to his feet, voice trembling with anger. "This is fraud. I'll sue you all. You have no right." Elliot Miles, Denise's steadfast legal counsel, cut him off with a cold, steel-edged response. "Ms. Carter is the sole person with the legal authority to call for a vote of no confidence. These documents, signatures, notarizations, every procedural step, have been verified by legal counsel and relevant authorities. From this moment on, operational control of the company is being transferred to Ms. Carter. Any complaints you may have can be submitted through proper channels, but I strongly advise you to exit the boardroom now and allow security to escort you." Wexler stood frozen, scanning the room in search of an ally, but every pair of eyes averted his. No one dared speak. Curtis bowed his head, as though he wished to disappear into his seat. One by one, the other board members accepted their dismissal notices or reassignment orders from Elliot, each face displaying mounting anxiety over their own fates. A pair of security officers entered quietly, but with unmistakable authority. "Mr. Wexler, please leave the boardroom immediately and comply with the new directives." Wexler looked toward Denise one last time. Fear flickered in his eyes, not from losing power, but from recognizing that this woman was nothing like any opponent he had ever faced. Her patience, her pain forged into steely resolve, and a stubborn will that refused to yield. These were forces he had never anticipated. In humiliating silence, he slipped out, his figure suddenly small and lost in the very room that had once been his kingdom. Only Curtis Banning remained, trembling as he looked up at Denise. Gathering what little strength he had left, he managed to say, I had no other choice, Denise. After Roland died, everything spiraled out of my control. Denise neither raised her voice nor offered any mockery. Her eyes were calm, as though she had just cleansed an old wound. You had plenty of choices, Curtis. But you chose betrayal. You chose to turn your back on the person who trusted you the most, not just me, but Roland. I will not allow that to happen again. In an atmosphere thick with guilt and dread, the board unanimously ratified the no-confidence vote and signed the transfer of executive power to Denise Carter. No objections were voiced. No one dared defend those former members. Beyond the glass walls, the Birmingham sky shone bright, as though the long storm had finally broken. Denise rose to her feet and surveyed the room, once a place where they had treated her as a mere shadow beneath their feet. Her eyes sparkled with a mixture of pride and sorrow, but her voice rang out with unwavering determination. From today forward, every mistake of the past will be corrected. Creswell Holdings will no longer be a place where workers are devalued and justice is suffocated in darkness. I am here not to seek revenge, but to build anew, for all those who have ever been forgotten. As Denise walked out of the boardroom, the remaining members watched her go with what was, for the first time, genuine respect. Outside, the workers still had no idea what had happened, but the tide had unmistakably turned at the summit of the Creswell Holdings tower. A heavy silence filled the boardroom as Denise Carter stood tall, her calm eyes sweeping over faces that were equal parts shocked, horrified, resentful, and helpless. Her voice rang out clearly, without a microphone and without raising her tone. Over the past 15 years, you have all looked right through me, trampled on so many people for a taste of petty power and fleeting fame. But today, I officially remove all that rot and toxicity from this place. Denise's gaze lingered longest on Thomas Wexler, who had once sat confidently in that seat of power, but now looked small and trembling under the weight of truth. The security team moved in, stern-faced, toward Wexler. He still tried to struggle, shouting out a final warning. "You'll regret this. Creswell can't survive without me." But no one responded. They escorted Wexler out, his footsteps echoing down the hallway like the death knell of an era defined by tyranny and abuse of power. Meredith Chandler, once Wexler's most loyal right hand, grew pale, hastily snapping her notebook shut and pretending to search her phone. I have to leave," she stammered. "I have a meeting with foreign partners." No one tried to stop Meredith. No one still cared about those who had conspired with Wexler to manipulate every decision and mask every injustice with empty, flowery words. One by one, the former allies slipped out of their seats and hurried from the room as if trying to escape the invisible force that Denise had just unleashed. Only a few neutral board members remained, those younger staffers who had been stifled by the old regime. Now, they stared at Denise with wide eyes, half in disbelief, half in hope. A woman they had once dismissed as Miss Denise, the invisible janitor of Creswell. Denise didn't rush out. She calmly gathered her documents, nodded at Elliot Miles, her steadfast ally who had helped expose an entire deceitful system, and then turned back to address the remaining members with firm resolve. "I'm not here to play boss. I don't need authority to instill fear. I'm here to rebuild Creswell Holdings' values, to restore fairness, trust, and dignity to everyone who's been forgotten. If any of you want to help me rebuild this foundation, stay and start today. If you think Creswell is just a place to enrich yourselves and exploit power, feel free to leave. I won't tolerate any more darkness." Her words resonated like a vow, making the room feel both heavy and filled with new hope. A young board member, Jonas Evers, rose hesitantly and spoke up. "Miss Carter, I want to stay. I used to think I had no voice, but today I see that change is possible." Others nodded as well. Some clenched their fists on the tabletop, silently pledging to themselves that they would never return to the old ways. Denise offered a gentle, unpretentious smile. "We will work not for fame, but for self-respect. I want Creswell to truly be a home for everyone, from warehouse workers and drivers to janitors and management. What you once saw as shadows in this building are actually the real strength that keeps it alive." Leaving the boardroom, Denise didn't take the private elevator. She merged into the flow of people in the main lobby, passing by astonished faces and furtive glances, whispered murmurs still hesitant to speak outright. She walked as if nothing had changed. Small in stature, composed, but her eyes shone with an unshakable confidence. Behind her, each pane of glass on the 8th floor reflected the image of Denise Carter, once invisible and ignored, now the supreme authority, bearing a mission far greater than revenge, restoring justice and dignity to all those who had ever been overlooked. The atmosphere at Creswell Holdings shifted overnight. Denise Carter, once a quiet figure quietly sweeping the halls, now stood openly in the CEO's office, a space that had long been the private stronghold of power, never before welcoming anyone considered invisible. Denise threw open the glass doors herself and pulled back the blinds so the morning sun flooded in, signaling a new chapter for the entire building. But she didn't sit down in the plush leather chair or gaze out at the city view. Instead, her first action was to send a special announcement to every employee, from drivers and janitors to warehouse workers and office staff. The very first company-wide meeting in Creswell's history, with no executives presiding, no speeches, just real people doing real business. That morning, the ground floor auditorium was packed, the air thick with skepticism and curiosity. No one had forgotten the image of Miss Denise picking up trash and cleaning windows. Now, here she was on stage, calm yet resolute. People in the crowd murmured to each other. She was the janitor here, right? Could it all really be true? Who is she, anyway? Denise spoke without a microphone, her voice warm yet firm, cutting through the hush. "I want to begin by saying thank you. Thank you to all of you, the people who have kept Creswell alive through every storm, even though not everyone's name has been called or their efforts recognized." She paused and scanned the room, her eyes lingering on the front rows. Alonzo Green, the driver who had worked unpaid overtime for years. Deborah Williams, the HR staffer who'd been haunted by the cruel policies she'd been forced to enforce. And Cynthia Moore, the janitor who'd recently faced a family crisis yet still showed up for every shift. Denise opened a thick binder and announced her first wave of decisions. Starting this week, any overtime pay that was withheld over the last 2 quarters will be paid in full. You'll see that money on your paycheck this Friday. All current health insurance contracts will be put on hold for review. We'll send surveys to each of you so you can choose your own providers. No more top-down decisions about your benefits. A tentative hand raised. It was Alonzo. "Miss Carter, what about those who were fired without cause? Will someone look into Terrence Doyle's case?" Denise nodded, her voice steady. "We will review every termination from the past 3 years, one file at a time. If anyone was let go unjustly, we will reach out to consider reinstatement, compensation, or at the very least, restoring their good name." A ripple of whispered conversation passed through the rows. skepticism easing into cautious hope. Deborah Williams stood up, hesitating. "And what about family leave policies, ma'am?" Before, we never had a say. Everything was imposed from above. Denise smiled, gentle but determined. "Going forward, no decisions about workers' rights will be made without your input. I want each of you to share your thoughts, and we will hold open forums to discuss every new policy." The meeting didn't end with thunderous applause, but with thoughtful looks, honest questions, and quiet murmurs of hope. Is she really for real? Could things actually change from now on? After the meeting, Denise didn't rush away. She stayed to hear feedback, jotting down notes, checking on Cynthia's son, sharing breakfast with the night shift security team, and stopping by the garage to talk with the drivers. Those small acts, seemingly ordinary, were nothing short of miraculous in a place that had long existed under fear and cold hierarchy. They began to restore the trust that had eroded over the years. Yet Denise was not naive. She noticed that some of the old guard, those who had wielded power under Wexler and Meredith, still watched from the sidelines, eager to protect their own interests. Discontented whispers floated down hallways, suspicious glances and sullen faces lingered whenever they passed the new CEO's office. But this time, Denise held real power. The power of truth and the backing of the majority who had supported her all these years. She would not let the past repeat itself. In her office, a small note scrawled by Cynthia was pinned neatly to the bulletin board. "Thank you for giving me hope that people like us can change the whole world." It served as a reminder full of meaning. True reform begins with listening, and fairness is not a privilege. It's the basic right of every human being. The atmosphere at Creswell Holdings, which had briefly sparked with hope, immediately ran into undercurrents of resistance from the old guard. Just days after Denise's first all-hands meeting, those accustomed to judging from on high began to quietly undermine and oppose her. They sneered in small group huddles, deliberately disrupted various departments, and even spread rumors questioning the limited management capabilities of the new CEO, someone they once only knew as a woman in an apron with a mop. Brent Wallace, the former head of finance, who owed his position to Meredith Chandler, openly voiced his doubts during a department meeting. "I'm afraid Ms. Carter's financial management experience is limited to balancing petty invoices, not overseeing multi-million-dollar budgets." His old allies stifled laughter, their eyes daring her. Denise neither backed down nor lost her temper. She met Brent's gaze directly, answering softly but icily. "For 15 years, I turned my pain into silence while safeguarding every contract and defending my family's capital from opportunists. Complex spreadsheets or multi-million-dollar budgets don't intimidate me as much as the cold indifference of those once called leadership here." Her response silenced the room. Rather than just words, Denise followed through with action. She ordered an independent audit of all expenditures under Wexler and Meredith. Those who had feasted off internal contracts were soon exposed, and some resigned voluntarily once they realized the era of cover. Oops was over. Denise promoted people previously marginalized, such as Deborah Williams from HR, haunted by harsh worker policies, and Alonzo Green, the veteran driver, who now became head of the transportation team. She rebuilt corporate culture from the ground up. The annual employee appreciation event was reinstated, serving as an apology for years of neglect. The cafeteria reopened to everyone, removing the management-only section. Every month, Denise held open forums where anyone could speak frankly, offer feedback and challenge without fear of reprisal. These small but fundamental changes provoked fierce pushback from remaining old guard leaders. They covertly made life difficult for newly promoted staff, sent disparaging emails, and even filed anonymous complaints about Denise's lack of professionalism with key partners. But Denise was prepared for these behind-the-scenes attacks. She drew on the resilience she had built over 15 years of silence, the resilience of someone who had hit rock bottom, of a person once reduced to an anonymous shadow. In a private meeting where she was pressured to prove her competence, Denise calmly presented the financial reports from the past 3 quarters, clear and detailed to the last line item. She highlighted the murky losses incurred under the old regime and showed how genuine profits were rising thanks to her reforms. Those figures became a razor-sharp weapon, slicing through every baseless criticism. At that moment, the true backbone of the company, workers who had long been silent and bowed, began to speak up in her defense. Cynthia Moore, now a sanitation supervisor, handed Denise a small note written in shaky handwriting. "You gave me faith that people like us can change everything." Denise read it, folded it, and tucked it carefully into her desk drawer, treating it like a talisman against the coming storm. To her, this note embodied real power. Not the power of sitting in the highest chair to make others grovel, but the power born from being forgotten, to restore hope for everyone. Yet the turbulence was far from over. Some major partners, once cozy with Wexler, threatened to cancel contracts and demanded Creswell return to its old ways. A handful of mid- and level managers stalled the rollout of new policies, hoping Denise would tire and give up. Denise responded with unwavering persistence. She made point of visiting each work area, sharing lunch with the drivers, talking with the cleaning crew, listening to feedback firsthand, and personally resolving grievances. Employees began to realize, for the first time in Creswell's history, they were no longer silent shadows, but people who were heard and respected. The invisible wall separating company classes gradually eroded, replaced by genuine collaboration. Amid this storm, Denise understood more clearly than ever that true power isn't about occupying the highest seat or issuing orders. It's about delivering justice, listening, and driving real change. The path was arduous and fraught with challenges, but each day, Denise grew more certain that her past as an invisible shadow was precisely the foundation upon which a new Creswell could be built, one where every value would be measured by mutual trust and respect. After months of turmoil, Creswell Holdings gradually entered a new era. Gone were the arrogant laughs echoing through locked boardrooms. Gone were the insensitive decisions handed down by those in flashy suits. Instead, each morning, the early sunlight streamed through the wide hallways, once a sanctuary of hierarchy and prejudice, and was met with friendly greetings and genuine laughter, sounds that had been absent here for so many years. Denise Carter was no longer the building's invisible shadow. In the weeks following her reforms, she still took time to walk down every hallway and visit every department, where the new janitors, or young employees, looked on in astonishment as the CEO happily sat down to share coffee with them and asked about their lives. Every time she passed by, Denise received respectful nods, grateful smiles, and true admiration. Things she had only felt in silence for the past 15 years. Yet the biggest question, one that resounded not just within Creswell but among everyone who witnessed the change, kept coming up, sometimes in informal gatherings, sometimes via email, even whispered in the corners of the hallways. "Why did you wait so long, Denise? Why not act sooner?" Denise always smiled, without a hint of offense or regret, and replied in a gentle but keener voice than ever, "Power only matters when used at the right moment. I wanted to see corruption down to its roots, so that when I did act, no one, whether on the board, in management, or the best lawyer, could deny or reverse the truth. I did not choose silence out of fear. I chose it because I knew the truth had to be laid bare, so that justice would become undeniable. At first, her answer left many people speechless. But when they saw how Denise treated every employee, how she restored fairness for those wrongfully fired, and how struggling families got their insurance and benefits reinstated, they realized some battles require a journey of patient, relentless preparation, anchored by a pain so deep that no one can overturn the outcome. The final image to close this story took place on a late weekend afternoon. The company courtyard hosted a small, informal gathering. No banners, no signs, just simple folding tables and chairs, heartfelt laughter, and the clinking of soda cans. Alonzo Green, once an exploited driver, now the new transportation manager, raised his glass and looked at Denise. To all the silent ones. To those who were once deemed invisible, when in fact you were the foundation of every success. Everyone lifted their glasses in unison, applause echoing under the brilliant sunset. Denise sat there, not dressed in her CEO's suit, but as an ordinary woman with eyes that had seen plenty, raising her glass in response. Never judge a person by their uniform. The janitor you saw yesterday could very well be the one who built this entire house. Listen and respect, because justice and kindness always begin with the simplest acts. The day ended with firm handshakes, humble well wishes, and the story of a black woman who was once considered a shadow, who had rewritten the definition of power and human worth in the heart of a large organization. That resonating message would spread far beyond, reminding every generation at Creswell. Justice is not a gift to be granted, but a right for anyone who dares to believe in themselves, even if they're dressed in the tattered uniform of an underdog. You've just followed the story of Denise Carter, the quiet woman who turned years of being underestimated into the strength to transform an entire empire. From a position once deemed invisible, she proved that true value doesn't lie in a uniform or title, but in steadfastness, kindness, and the courage to stand up and demand fairness. So what about you? Have you ever been underestimated because of your appearance, your job, or your background? If you were in Denise's shoes, would you have stayed silent and observed, or bravely taken action at the decisive moment? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be the inspiration someone else needs. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to hit like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more inspiring stories. Thank you for listening.